Hey YouTube, welcome back to Tinker with Tools. It's no secret in the past that I have not been the biggest fan of the Bosch Freak, so can their new replacement make me change my mind? Let's get into that on Tinker with Tools. Now when I say in the past I have not been the biggest fan of the Bosch Freak, I really think it's important to clarify what I mean by that. See, the concept itself I do think is actually pretty ingenious, having a tool that can both drive quarter-inch hex bits and half-inch square drive without having to make any changes to the tool really adds a unique bit of versatility that pretty much no one else on the market is doing. Now, unfortunately, the execution of that, I think, is where it falls a little bit short on the promise or potential that that idea has. In the past, this tool was neither very good as an impact driver or an impact wrench when you start comparing it to dedicated tools in either one of those areas. And so because it's not the most compact, it lacks some of the common features that you see on more modern impact drivers, and then it just wasn't very good as either an impact driver or an impact wrench. The actual tool that they delivered just always fell short of that potential of the idea, in my opinion itself. So earlier this year, Bosch announced that they were actually coming out with a new version of this tool. Now I think there's a few notable changes here that Bosch has made very clear. First off, this is no longer called an impact driver that is socket ready, but instead they are actually just calling it an impact wrench that also features quarter-inch hex. So I think that is going to be a shift in the focus or the design for what this tool is intended for, and I think that is going to hopefully specialize at one side or the other a little bit more while still giving you some of that versatility. Now the next big change is going to be in the amount of torque that they are delivering in this tool. Right out of the gate, this one was previously came to 1,860 inch-pounds, and that is going to be 210 newton meters. This new model is going to be at 285 newton meters, or roughly 2,500 inch-pounds of fastening torque. That is a pretty substantial increase, while the tool actually did not get really that much larger. It is just a hair longer, in my opinion, when you stand them side by side. Really not a noticeable difference though. And in terms of weight, this one is actually only 2 grams heavier than this tool, basically the exact same weight. Now, as far as other changes between the different models, there are a bunch of different things that they have changed. First, the light did move from the base of the tool on this older model, a single LED down here, to a single LED right underneath the base. Is one better than the other? I don't necessarily think so, but it is a bit of a difference, so I figure I'll mention it. Additionally, there are going to be a difference in the different modes that are there. This one is going to be a 2-speed mode versus the prior 3-speed model here. Now this one still does have a couple of assist modes. When you're fastening something, it will have auto stop when it reaches a certain amount of torque. The other one is going to be an auto breakaway feature where you're actually kind of breaking away lug nuts. It is going to stop rotating as soon as it kind of feels the resistance kind of give away. The tool is very similar. Obviously, design-wise, it's changed with more of this front silver cone. For what it's worth, this one does kind of have a metal cone underneath the black outer plastic as well. They've just kind of made it more apparent here. Now the last feature that is missing from the new tool is going to be any of the connectivity that was previously done through the Bluetooth module that you could buy extra and install into the handle of the tool. All that customization is absent on this tool. It is a more simple, basic tool, if you will, and it's not necessarily what they're aiming for with this tool. Now, in addition to the torque differences between these tools, there is going to be a difference in the RPMs, and that is where I think it starts to get interesting with this tool in terms of how it appears in the actual use. Now the previous tool went all the way down to 1100 RPMs, and that's speed 1, and then all the way up to 3400 RPMs in its speed 3. This one actually only goes from 2000 RPMs in speed 1 to 2800 RPMs in speed 2. Now I do get that they're reducing the RPMs to be more impact wrench-like. I'm not necessarily knocking that. The big knock that I have with this tool is going to be coming to the trigger and kind of its initial tipping point of when it actually starts spinning. With this tool, you are not going to get any sort of slow, fine speed control. When it starts, it is kind of going to that minimum speed that it'll produce, no matter how gentle you are with the trigger. Over here, with this one, you can have it tip in, just start very slow and have a very fine control. Now, this trigger is not necessarily the world's best trigger, but compared to this one over here, it is light years different, and that is one of the lacking features on this tool, is the trigger is just really bad. Now when we tested the Bosch GDX18V-285 impact driver that was also announced and released roughly at the same time, that was another thing there, that the trigger just was not as good as what I'd gotten used to on my 1950 or the 220 as you might know it in other territories. This trigger is once again just not great, and even worse in my opinion than what you're getting over here, and it is a noticeable difference. Now with that said, when we do some of the performance testing, I'll be sure to point out where you kind of see some of that performance difference with that style of trigger, or at least that programming, how they've set this tool up. All right, so now speaking of performance testing, let's go ahead and do some fastener testing. I am going to show the removal of a couple of lug nuts and try and do some comparisons also on this tool, showcasing how it does using its 1/2-inch square drive versus its 1/4-inch hex on a similar fastener. So we'll see if there's any difference there. All right, so now with that performance testing, let's go ahead and talk about what some of the differences are. Now, first and foremost, I want to remind you, this is now being marketed as an impact wrench. Most of the testing I did was probably a little bit more skewed towards its impact driver functionality versus its impact wrench functionality. So I want to make it abundantly clear, That is not where this tool is going to shine. By decreasing that RPMs down to 2800, you did see an impact, pun intended, to the performance of the tool and how quick it was able to drive fasteners compared even to the older generation of the Bosch Freak. Now, at no point did it really feel like it was struggling, but I was a little bit surprised to see that it wasn't able to even get an advantage on that larger 8-inch fastener, where I would think the torque here would definitely be something that would come more into play. Now, one thing that's important to note is, just like we've seen with prior generations of this style of tool, it actually was able to perform better using a 1/4-inch hex drive nut driver versus a socket that was going to be driven by the 1/2-inch square drive. We tested one thing there that was on camera, a few others that were off camera that I didn't record, and in each time the performance was markedly different, where you were seeing better performance using something in the 1/4-inch hex drive. I think that's always going to be a weakness of this tool, is that you're not going to be getting peak performance using its greatest feature, in my opinion. All right, now last but not least, we did also, like I said, remove some lugs, and I did some other testing that didn't appear on camera. With that lug nut testing, one thing that was noticeably clear is because this one starts out at such a higher RPM, it immediately starts hitting, it was able to very quickly and easily remove those lug nuts. And even though the difference in removing a lug nut in 0.57 seconds versus 0.37 seconds is not that great, keep in mind that it was roughly 50% faster in doing that task. Now, at the end of the day, both of these are going to be able to do lug nuts, but I think this one will probably be able to reach a little bit higher. All right, now before I talk final conclusions, one thing I want to talk about is price, because that is where this one gets a bit interesting. If you recall, when we talked about the 215 last week, it initially dropped at $129, which was a really appealing price, but has very quickly risen to $149. Now, unlike that previous impact driver pricing, which climbed after it was released, this one actually as a kit was released at $159, and that's actually what I paid for it. But within roughly a week of when I purchased it, the price has now dropped to $99 at Lowe's near me, and appears to be staying there through the end of the summer, which is giving you a great opportunity to pick this up at $99 potentially. And at that price point, this starts to get pretty compelling. So now conclusions. Let's go ahead and talk about what I like about the tool and kind of what I still don't love about the tool. Now, what I like about it is they have decided that this is an impact wrench, and they've made it more impact wrench-like, and those are going to be all positive changes about the tool. Giving it more power makes it a more compelling tool, and especially as kind of a lighter duty impact wrench around the shop, I really do think this is good. For a lot of the work that I do, I am not a mechanic by any means. This is probably going to be more than sufficient for my needs as an impact wrench. I do think that some of the functionality makes it less friendly towards impact drivers, and so it is not something that I'm going to recommend somebody buy to use mostly as both tools, but more importantly, this is going to be something that is an impact wrench that can be used as an impact driver in a pinch, but it's not going to excel at that. Now, the pieces that make it a little hard for me is, although I kind of understand why if it's an impact wrench, you really want it to hit hard and fast when it's doing something like a breakaway or kind of putting something on, you do want it to be a bit more aggressive. It actually makes it a less enjoyable tool to use, in my opinion, unless you're using it specifically for those tasks. That trigger is just not something that I enjoy using, and it's one of the downsides of this. Now, at the end of the day, at $99, which is where it's at right now for the kit, I think it's a pretty compelling value. And so this is something that I think if you've liked past generations of Freaks, you're going to like this even more. If you haven't loved some of the previous generations, but you're in the market for an impact wrench and you're on the Bosch platform, this is not a bad option, in my opinion, to get something that still gives you some versatility. And so I do think they've improved it. It still is just falling short of maybe what its max potential is. All right, so there you have it. If you have any questions, please go ahead and leave them in the comments down below. If you like this sort of video, go ahead and hit the like button. And if you haven't already, please consider subscribing. Make sure to turn on notifications so you get notified when I put out a new video. As always, thank you for your continued support, and until next time, I'll catch you on Tinker with Tools.